Hi, welcome to the next open session. Today we're going to be talking about basic psychological needs and how they contribute to building thriving teams that can achieve any impact that they set out for. My doggo today is very adamant that she stays with us and that she walks behind me, so please forgive me for all of the background noise. Now let's get to the presentation. As we're going to discuss all of the basic psychological needs and what it means in the context of the team, I want you to really be able to unpack that also with your particular team. And so, towards the end of this session, I'm going to be sharing a link to a workbook that you can use in order to organize a internal workshop with your team and unpack how much do they feel that their needs are being supported and satisfied, and plan some activities that will allow you to move ahead and improve the situation for the entire team and also particular team members. All of the links will be also in the description below. Now, let's start from the goal. We typically form teams to achieve certain goals, right? We want them to perform well, but also we want people in the team to be well, to stick around, to really feel that they can thrive and at least avoid burnout, but that's the bare minimum. We also want people in our teams to be able to share their knowledge and exchange what they learn as they go through any process, any project that they are tasked with implementing. Now, for that to happen and for that to happen well, there are some preconditions that have to be in place. One of them is the type of motivation that people in your team have. There are two types of motivation, and we will talk about this in more detail a little bit later. But for now, what is important for you to know that on the high level, we have controlled motivation and autonomous motivation. And these two generate two very different types of team dynamics and impact outcomes in your team and in your work. Now, for these motivations to occur, there is another thing that needs to happen, and that is the satisfaction or frustration of so-called basic psychological needs. These needs are pretty much universal in the sense that we all have them. They might manifest themselves differently in many different cultures. There might be some different flavors and nuances to them, but in principle, we as humans all have the need for autonomy, competence, and relatedness when it comes to our work experience. Now, let's dive deeper into each one of them. Autonomy is the need to feel volition, to feel that I have the psychological freedom to perform my tasks, to do the job that I signed up for, right? That I have a sense of choice. Competence is the need to feel effective, that I can do things. I have mastery in my field, that I can also express what I know and what I can do. And then finally, relatedness is this need to feel connected to others, cared for, but also caring for others, feeling that I am a part of a team. Now, let's unpack them a little bit more. When we're talking about the need for autonomy, and this is actually one of the most important of the three, if you will, we are talking about either an experience of choice or an experience of compulsion. Now, I'm providing you a few sentences that can show you when a need might be satisfied or when this need might be frustrated. So when you're hearing things like, I feel a sense of choice and freedom in the things I undertake. My decisions reflect what I really want. I feel my choices express who I really am. This means that your team is actually experiencing a high enough or high level of autonomy, right? Uh, when, on the other hand, you hear things like, oh, I feel forced to do many things. I wouldn't choose to do them otherwise. My daily activities at work feel like a chain of obligations. I feel pressured to do many things. This is a red flag. These types of sentiments and sentences signal to you that the need for autonomy in your team is actually toward. Now, the second need that we all have is the need for competence. So in this context, it's the experience of mastery versus the experience of failure. Now, what types of sentiments or thoughts and sentences would you hear when this need is satisfied? You would hear things like, I feel confident that I can do the things that I'm tasked with doing. I feel capable at what I do. I can successfully complete difficult tasks, right? On the other hand, when this need is frustrated, you might hear things like, I feel like a failure because of the mistakes that I'm doing, right, at work. I have serious doubts whether or not I can actually do things well. I feel insecure about my abilities on the job, right? So these, again, are red flags. These are signals that members of your team might not be able to fully express their competence, and that they feel that this particular need is frustrated for them. And then finally, relatedness. With relatedness, we're looking for either experience of connection, or when the need is frustrated, it's the experience of isolation. And so naturally, the sentiments that we would hear when this need is satisfied would be things like, oh, I feel that I feel that people I care about also care about me in the context of work. I feel close and connected to my peers. I experience a warm feeling with the people that I spend time with at work, right? On the other hand, when this need is frustrated, we would hear things like, oh, I feel excluded from the group that I belong to. I feel that the relationships I have at work are superficial. I have the impression that people I spend time with dislike me. All of these, again, naturally would signal to you that this particular need in your team is not fully satisfied, that people get frustrated because their relationships, the quality of their relationships at work, is not sufficient. And for this particular need, I think what is critical to stress is that this is applicable with remote work as well. The need for connectedness is not limited to on-site work, on-site teams. It's also critical for teams that are distributed online or hybrid. And this is particularly important if you are leading this type of a team. So let's summarize. We have the fuel, we have the input, your basic psychological needs, the autonomy, competence, and relatedness. These turn into motivation, control or autonomous, which then translates into a variety of outputs. Let's look closely at the types of motivation. On the high level, we can think of motivation as a spectrum. On the one end, you would have controlled motivation. This is the type of motivation that we get from external sources and external pressures. This might mean that you are motivated by rewards, say your paycheck, punishments, compliance, or that you're motivated by certain needs or avoidance of certain experiences. So you might want to build your ego, but you might want to avoid guilt or shame. You might seek approval. These all are needs and motivations that place the source of satisfaction or frustration outside of yourself. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, we have autonomous motivation. This type of motivation comes from within. So this is either related to your personal values, the importance you give to the task that you're doing as a team or as a member of a team, to the goals and values that your team or your organization is trying to portray and accomplish. This is also the type of motivation that is closely tied to the feeling of enjoyment and pleasure when you're performing your work tasks, the satisfaction that you get out of doing things well. And so this is the motivation that shows up when you thrive in your work. And what we see from the research is that it's less about the quantity, the amount of motivation, how strongly you're motivated. It's more about the type of motivation. Where are you on this spectrum? Are you more controlled? Are you more about controlled motivation? Is that where your drive is coming from? Or is it coming from your internal values and needs and interest or enjoyment? This has higher relevance to the outputs and your well-being at work than the actual amount of motivation. Now, if we want to really boil it down to the basics, the frustration of your basic psychological needs leads to controlled motivation. When people in your team do not feel autonomous, competent, and related to one another, they are very likely to mostly be driven by controlled motivation. When, on the other hand, these needs are satisfied for the members of your team, they are more likely to experience autonomous motivation and all of the benefits that come with it. And we'll talk about these benefits in a second. In broad strokes, controlled motivation often translates into ill-being and distress, some difficult somatic symptoms, say headaches, stomach aches, physical exhaustion, and a risk of burnout. And for the team as a whole, higher turnover in tensions. Autonomous motivation is related to higher job satisfaction, greater vitality, well-being, fewer psychological difficulties or challenges, psychosomatic symptoms. So on the high level, there is a big quality difference in terms of what these types of motivation are related to. But let's look a bit closer into very specific outputs that we can measure in terms of your team and how it's performing. The very first thing that we can look at is the actual output of the work that your team members are doing. So are they achieving the goals that they are tasked with? Do they perform well? Do they experiment? Do they look for new solutions and new ways of working? How well do they perform? And with this, again, we see a big difference between people who experience controlled motivation and those who experience the autonomous type of motivation. People with controlled motivation are typically narrower in focus and less creative. That means that they might be actually good at algorithmic tasks, things that are simple, repetitive, rule-based, right? So they will be able to fulfill these tasks without too many hiccups. The downside, though, is that this is not a long-term game for most of the people. They will suffer some long-term well-being consequences if that's the only vibe, if you will, of work that they experience. When it comes to autonomous motivation, on the other hand, this is the type of motivation that really nurtures creativity and helps people who are in roles related to complex tasks, creative tasks, to problem solving. In fact, research shows that employee autonomy, so one of the core basic psychological needs, is linked to profitability, the output of your organization, especially if you a younger organization or a younger team. Second area that we can examine is the impact of the type of motivation on knowledge sharing. And again, the distinction is quite clear. When people work and act based on controlled motivation, they are very unlikely to share their knowledge. In fact, they are likely to hide what they know, what they've learned. The carrot and stick incentives, they backfire rather than help when promoting knowledge exchange. This focus on rewards or competition that is typical for controlled motivation makes people reluctant, not willing to bother, right, to share what they know with their teammates or with their organization as an entity. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, with autonomous motivation, research shows that people who experience that are much more likely to share knowledge, to be proactive in actually mentoring others, sharing their work documents, cheat sheets, share the notes from what they've learned, the mistakes that they've made. So this is something that is actually enjoyable for them if the motivation is autonomous. And then finally, looking at all of these outputs and the types of basic psychological needs that we all have, there are some critical lessons for team leaders, organizational leaders that should really be focused on and taken into account when running your team or your organization. And let's start from the bottom. The very first one listed here and based on the research is that when you're leading a team or an organization, you need to provide and share a rationale for what you're doing. As I mentioned, in an autonomous motivation, a key part is related to the values that people hold near and dear to their hearts, the beliefs about what's worth doing, what's important to accomplish. So from that perspective, providing a rationale for the work, for the project, for the task that they are doing, and then unpacking it with them will allow you to create the ground for increased autonomous motivation. And then from there, you would need to take care of each of the basic psychological needs. You would need to support people's competence, include them, and give them space to create and design the ways in which they problem solve, in which they complete their tasks, in which they also share knowledge with others. Mentoring options, peer-to-peer support options are something that allows people to express their competence. And is also tied to the second psychological need, which is relatedness. If you're able to create situations in which people can connect on a different level, get to know each other on a different level, support one another, also in tasks that might be adjacent to work or even outside of work. This is something that really creates trust, creates this feeling of belonging and relatedness, which then translates again into well-being, knowledge sharing, and better performance. And then finally, the support of autonomy. In short, do not micromanage. People who are hired for a role should be given the space and the ability to perform the role in the best way that they can. Deciding what's the pace in which they're going to accomplish tasks, what's the order of things, what are the ways in which they are going to accomplish tasks. It means giving them space to experiment and test new solutions, to be proactive. It's basically giving them space, right? And if you are able to really hone down on these three psychological needs, as well as the binding narrative, you have very high chances of leading a team that is able to achieve anything that they set out for, and that doesn't really have a high turnover of team members. They will simply be willing and likely to stick around for way, way longer than, say, a single project or a year. Now, if you're looking to connect with others who are leading teams in the social impact, change making sector. If you want to learn more about things related to psychological well being and other tools that can make your work in terms of generating impact easier and more effective, I would very much like to invite you to join our online community, which is called the Avayo Collective. At this point, the community is in beta testing, but we are launching on March 18th, 2026. So I would encourage you to register for the launch, for the event. But also, if you want to be notified about the community actually being launched and get all of the updates that come with it, you can join the waitlist so that you don't miss the actual opening. With that, I hope you and your team have all of your basic psychological needs satisfied to the fullest. Have a lovely rest of the day, and thank you so much for tuning in. See you in the next one. Ciao.